Russia Tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly, for being with us. And first of all, I would like to ask you about the news, news on Mr. Rogozin. You have tweeted about the incident that he's been involved in Donbass. Do you know him personally?
I don't think I do. It's possible that I've met him before because I left NASA in 2016 before he was the head of Roscosmos, but I still think he may have moved in those circles, but I don't have any recollection of ever meeting him, but I think it's possible that I have.
All right. And why do you comment on the steps that he takes on him? Why do you think it's important?
Well, when he was the head of the Russian space agency, Roscosmos, he threatened to leave an American crew member on board the space station because of the sanctions and other actions that the U.S. government has taken in many countries around the world. And I just thought that was unacceptable. And I felt like somebody needed to speak out. And since I have a big platform, me speaking out would get a lot of attention, not based on anything special about me. It's just because I have a lot of followers. So I called him out on it, and we had an exchange back and forth. Yeah. And then he later just left Twitter, never to come back.
How would you evaluate him as a head of Roscosmos? I'm sure you have your opinion about that.
Yeah, like I said, he was there as the leader after I had left. Yeah. I do know some of the people that worked below him, and they were very capable. Managers and stuff. I don't know how his leadership really influenced the function of Roscosmos on a day-to-day basis, but I do know that he doesn't have, I think, the temperament and the wisdom to lead an organization like that in any country.
Is he specifically a professional in this field? Because I can imagine how important and how complicated this job is. Mm-hmm. Could you, the people, your Russian colleagues, and I'm sure you have exchanged opinions on his decisions.
Yeah, when I bring him up to some former cosmonauts, they laugh, and I don't think they take him seriously either, regardless of which side of the issue of the Russian invasion of Ukraine they may be on. He seems to universally be considered as a not very serious and effective person.
Do you have any idea where Russian space program and cosmonauts and Russian astronomy is in right now? I mean, is it developing? Where is the Russian air mission, space mission right now?
I think the future of the Russian space program, unfortunately, is very bleak. They had relied on international investment, launching, satellites on some of their rockets, and they're not going to have that anymore, I think, for a long time. Also, I think the ability or the willingness of a country like the United States or the European Space Agency to, cooperate like we have been doing on the space station is probably over as far as, any future cooperation. I can't see the U.S. government coming to any agreement to participate in space with Roscosmos while, Putin and the current form of government is in power. Maybe someday, but I think it'll take a long time to recover. So without that international investment, without international participation and cooperation, unfortunately, I think, like a lot of Russian industries, the future is bleak, which for me is unfortunate because I do have friends that work for the Russian space program. And some of those people feel very much the way I do about the war in Ukraine. They might not feel like they can speak up like I do, certainly if they're still living in Russia. but that's gonna affect their lives as well, unfortunately.
I would like to ask you just one last question about Rogozin. Why do you think he went to this war?
I don't know, but there's a saying in English: you mess with the bulls, you get the horns, and it seems like he was trying to play soldier or something, and found out that this is no joke, right? This is a war. People die. His friends died. And but he seems to think, I guess, that this is some kind of playground for him. And other people, I think, maybe feel the same way until they really see it in person, what war could be like. And I think he found out.
Mr. Kelly, I know that you're an ambassador for one of the charity projects initiated by Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. How did this happen? How did you get this job?
Yeah, well, his team just reached out to me, and they had noticed my advocacy, I think, online. They had noticed that I had already raised almost $500,000 that I donated all of it to humanitarian aid in Ukraine through a NFT fundraiser. And also, apparently, President Zelensky said that he liked how I trolled a Russian propagandist into oblivion. And I think he was referring to Rogozin, but I wouldn't call it trolling. I would say it's more like being a social media warrior, maybe, than being a troll. A troll's got kind of a negative connotation. Yeah, so they asked me if I wanted to do it. I quickly just did a little research to just see what United 24 was, what they were about. And within, several minutes of being asked, I said I would absolutely do it and, do whatever I can to support this cause, because I do believe it's not only a fight for Ukraine and for Ukrainian freedom, but it's a fight for freedom and democracy around the world.
And you have visited recently Ukraine. You've been at the hospital where you saw children wounded by Russian airstrikes and Russian army. Yeah. After that, what has changed for you? And what did you do after you visited and after you saw these children?
Just meeting the kids, and, some of these kids were wounded by the war. Certainly there were medical patients there. There were kids with cancer and stuff, which is always hard to see. But the kids that were injured in war, many times their parents were also killed. And, just to see the look of, I think you say two things. You see the look of the PTSD, the stress and trauma they've experienced on their faces, but when you kind of dig down deeper, you see their resilience too, as kids. And the staff too was just incredible. I get from my trip there, I just get the sense that and I didn't come up with this quote, but the idea that people fighting for their freedom are going to fight so much harder and with so much more energy and enthusiasm and drive than a bunch of conscripts being rounded up and sent to some country with really no purpose or goal or understanding of what they're even doing there. So just seeing the resilience of the Ukrainian people was very encouraging and inspirational.
Has it changed your attitude? I know that before that, of course, you were advocating for Ukraine and so on and so forth, but did this trip change anything in terms of your activity? Did it make you even more, active or something like that?
Well, I think, when you see something in person versus hearing about it, it, gives you more credibility. It gives you, knowledge that you didn't otherwise have. I visited Bucha and saw where those atrocities had occurred, spoke to the people that lived there, that were there when the Russians were there. Irpin, likewise, just the destruction on infrastructure and people's homes. You could tell especially in Irpin, that destruction was intentional. This is not collateral damage. mean, you had Russian tanks just rolling down the road, blasting away at people's apartments and houses and stores and cultural centers. I mean, for a country that espouses how much culture is important to them, meaning Russia, for them to then go and intentionally destroy another country's culture is just unconscionable, among all the other things they've done, war crimes, killing non-combatants, targeting non-military targets. It's just, I didn't really expect to see this in Europe in this day and age.
Of course, and apparently you heard that, because you fight Russian propaganda, you've heard that they are saying that Bucha has never happened, that this is the myth, and that Ukrainians, with the help of the West, have constructed this whole scene. And I would like to ask you about your motivation when you write things, the truth about the war in Ukraine. Why did you do that? I mean, why did you start to do that? Why is it so important?
Why did I do it? A few reasons. I have Ukrainian friends. My brother-in-law came from Kharkiv when he was 10, and so his children, my niece and nephew, are Ukrainian Americans. My Russian language teacher is from Kharkiv, Ukrainian. Been friends for a really long time. One of my dearest friends, and I'm a big believer in democracy and freedom. And I think this kind of action taken by one person in Europe really threatens freedom and democracy around the world. So I just felt obligated to try to help in whatever way I can. Speaking though, you mentioned Bucha never happening. It's interesting. One of my cosmonaut colleagues that's on the wrong side of this sent me pictures from Bucha where the cars were overturned and the windows. This was an early attempt at Putin in this kind of, fake news propaganda thing with when you see these like windows that aren't broken, but the cars flipped over. The reason those cars were flipped over is they were flipped over to drain the gasoline out of them. I mean, they weren't flipped over by explosions that then didn't, break the windows. But just Russia does a really, really good job at manipulating their population, brainwashing them, I could say, because some of the thoughts and the ideas that some of my former colleagues have on this is just fantasy, but they believe it. So, it's worked on the Russian population, probably not all of them, but certainly enough of them, at least right now, to keep this going.
But do you think that your activity, your posts, your tweets, that this all helps to change the attitude of some Russians, maybe not everyone, but some Russians, your former colleagues, but not only them, also maybe your subscribers, your followers on Twitter?
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful. I mean, that's why I do it. I don't do it for the attention. I do it that hopefully I can change some minds and raise some money. But how much influence that will have. My own probably personal campaign, probably not a lot, but I think together with a group of people around the world that are vocal about this, that keep hammering home the message. I think together as a group, you can have a lot of influence. So I'm just feel like I'm a small participant in that, crowd sourced counter propaganda to just the nonsense and craziness that comes out of Russia.
I remember that you have returned your medal that you've got from Dmitry Medvedev, ex-president of Russian Federation, ex-prime minister, one of the faces of the war. And I saw your position. You said you could not just have it after Russia has started this terrible war. And you have met Dmitry Medvedev. Definitely, I have seen the pictures. What can you say about this person?
Well, when I didn't talk to him long, I'd met him. He seems when he was keeping Putin's seat warm, he seemed like a moderate, fairly reasonable guy that I think some people looked up to as maybe a future leader of Russia post-Putin. And somehow during this war, he just transitioned into one of the craziest of the crazies. And there's a lot of crazies over there, but he's right up there with the best of them. Him, Soloviev, the woman I forget who's the head of RTV. Yeah,
it's Margarita Simonyan.
They're like the three stooges of nut jobs that at least I see, espousing just such crazy nonsense, completely detached from reality, in my opinion.
And it's interesting how they talk about the United States and the Western world, and all of them are insisting that this is the war between Russia and NATO, that NATO, the United States mainly, manipulates Ukraine, and that this is the war between ideologies, between Russian conservatism and the liberal ideology headed by the United States of America. Do you think they're serious when they say things like that?
Well, there's so much there, right, in your question. So Russian conservatism, give me a break. These guys that have like multiple families and wives and girlfriend, they're supposed to be so pure and conservative. Come on. But, I think Putin realized that, Ukraine wasn't going to lay down for him quickly. So he's very adept, I think, at changing his goals and changing, constantly re-explaining what he's doing. It's interesting that, in the regions of Ukraine where there was a referendum and Russia says, 95% of these people voted to be part of Russia. And then he, at least on paper, says that they are now, part of Russia, yet then attacks the civilian population there. I mean, in what world does that make sense? I mean, this is just one crazy thing after another. And, my hope is just at some point, the Russian people are going to rise up and stop him, because this isn't going to turn out well for them either, and the quicker this stops, the easier time they're going to have to recover their country, their economy, their pride, which is probably going to take decades. So, my hope is that at some point, the Russian people in power, somebody's going to stand up to Putin and get this moving in the right direction, because, NATO doesn't want Russia. I mean, what's NATO going to do with Russia? Come on, give me a break. So, and this is not a defensive war. Ukraine didn't step one foot in Russia prior to this invasion. So this is all on Russian soldiers and, their population, because that's the government that they kind of choose to let happen. I wouldn't say they voted for it, but I think they just let it happen, unfortunately.
I have just a couple of last things. You have mentioned your ex-colleagues and your friends, Russian friends. I know that you have spent almost a year together with a Russian colleague on, how is it, MKS? Yeah, and so is there, do you still have relationships with them, friendly relationships? Have you lost anyone? Do you
definitely strained. I wouldn't say completely broken and unrepairable, but probably close to that. But I do also talk to the more reasonable-minded Russian people that realize this is just flat out wrong and want nothing to do with it, and are ashamed, actually. So it's one extra emotion that, like, I don't have any shame over this, but, they have that burden as well.
Last question, if you don't mind, Mr. Kelly. So how much time have you spent in space?
520 days.
520 days. So this is a huge amount of time. Do you have a different view, maybe different from ours, on the problems, the conflicts on Earth? If you look at this from the space, from there, If you look at our issues, I would say, is there a different view that you have? And maybe you have solutions for this terrible war?
Well, I think when people fly in space, they generally have this experience where you see the Earth, you see that it doesn't seem all that big compared to what your idea of it is. Once you get to space, you're like, it's this blue ball floating in the blackness of space, not all that big. You don't see political borders from space. I mean, when you look at Europe and Asia, it looks like just one big thing. It doesn't look like a specific country. There are people down there, they have, similar challenges in their lives, regardless of what country they may be on. They want, to raise their kids. They want to be able to feed them, send them to school, just basic things. And, I think the pandemic has shown us that we're all so much more interconnected, as a species than, prior to that happening, because, you see how one thing can happen on one part of the world that, quickly spreads around the rest of the world. A war in Europe and Ukraine can have a significant impact on people's lives in other parts of the world, including, food insecurity. So we are very much interconnected on this planet. And when you're flying on this space station, that is probably the hardest thing we've ever done. If we can do that and do it cooperatively and do it with like a country like Russia that historically we have not always been that friendly with, then, we can solve these other problems on Earth. We just have to be willing to work together and do it peacefully and cooperatively. I mean, this war is not going to end well for anybody. When the worst people that have to deal with it are the Ukrainians, but, everyone's going to lose in some way. So, I'm just hopeful at some point we'll have, something will change here. But I think that change, has to come in Russia. It's not going to come from the Ukrainians. I mean, they're not going to lay down their arms. They're going to fight to the end. And, hopefully Russia realizes that. And by the way, it's going to be a positive end for them. I don't see any way that Russia could win this.
Neither do I. Thank you very much.
TV Rain is on the air.
For 12 years, we remained the only independent news channel in Russia. We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы приняли решение, что мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We have operated as a European company from Europe and now also broadcast in English.
Kherson has surrendered.
Russia's propaganda targets have changed.
Putin cries havoc. We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube and let's take a look at our future together.